In this video, validating user input, we're going to have a look at using control flow to make sure our terminal user input functions succeed without failing. So we're going to extend Hello User program, the version where we've separated out the terminal user input functions into their own header file and CPP file. And what we're going to do is make sure that we can read a number in without it crashing. So if you remember, when we used read integer, if the user typed text, then the program crashed. We can use control flow to help fix that situation. All right, so here's my program. And here's our terminal user input file. What we need to do is between line 18 and 19, make sure that the value inside the line is definitely an integer. So it's a whole number. So the problem is at the moment that it crashes here when we try to convert it if it's not a number. All right, so how can we do this? The great thing is we can use a while loop, and the while loop will make sure that the user enters a valid number. We can then use the splashkit isInteger function to check whether the value inside this string is actually a number. And we're going to loop while it's not a number. So if the user has entered anything other than a whole number, what we can do is write out an error message to say, make sure you enter a whole number. And then we'll read in a string again from the user. We use a while loop rather than an if statement because we want to repeat this. If they entered some text here when it executed the first time, we definitely want to go in. But if they still entered text, we need to go back around and check again. They've entered something again, but we shouldn't trust what the user has input. We check it. If it's valid, or if it's not valid in this case, while it's not valid, we print out the error message and keep looping. That will guarantee that by the time we get down here, the value that they've entered is an integer. Let's just check that that works. So we can compile the program and we can run it. And if I enter my name, that works. And if I enter text as my age, it doesn't crash anymore. It's not an integer, so we're now inside that while loop. And notice if I enter text again, it keeps going in that loop. It doesn't matter how many times I enter something that isn't a number, it's going to give me that error message and force me to enter a valid value. So now if I put in my age, that works. That's when that loop stops because the value that we entered was an integer. So that would be true. Not true is of course false, which means that we skip over that and come down and convert that integer. All right. Now that we have that working, what we can do is extend our program to read integer in a range. All right, so down here, what we can do is create a second read integer function. And this time, we'll add some extra parameters. This is called overloading. We've overloaded read integer. There are two versions of it. One which you pass a string, and one which you pass a string and two integers. And what we're going to do here is implement read integer, in this case, to make sure that that integer is between this minimum value and this maximum value. How can we do that? Well, first of all, I'm going to need to read in an integer. Now, I could read in a line, I could convert it, we could do all of this code, but why would we? We've got a read integer function. We can just call it, and all of that code will be used in this place. So if I pass read integer a string, so the prompt, that will come up into this variable here, which is also called prompt. They could be called different things. It then runs this code and makes sure that the value we get back is an integer. We can store that, therefore, in our own integer variable. At the end of the function, we could return the value that's in that variable. And so between lines 35 and 37, we just have to make sure that that integer is in the right range. How can we do that? Well, we can use another while loop. So while the value that the user has entered is less than the minimum value, we also want to check if it's larger than the max value. But we use or because we want either of them to be true. If this is true, if it's less than the minimum, we want to print out the error message. We also want to print out the error message if the result is larger than the maximum. While it might sound like you want and, this is a case where you definitely want or, because we need both of them to be true. If we think about that, let's see. So if we did, say, between 1 and 10, and they entered -5, is -5 less than 0, or less than 1? Yes. Okay, that means we should definitely run. So the or guarantees that. If we used and, it would then check, is -5 also larger than 10, which is not. And so it wouldn't loop. So we need or here. The error message, we can use please enter a number between and output the min and the max. And remember, we need to read in an integer again. Now, because we've used toString, we need to go back up the top here and make sure we have using namespace std. That's because toString is in the standard namespace. To finish this off, we need to copy our prototype into the terminal user input header file. So if we put that here with a semicolon at the end, we're saying that we have, or that we're supplying read string and 2 read integers, one that takes a string prompt and one that takes a string prompt, an int min and an int max. So if we adjust our program now, we could add a test variable. We could use our read integer, and here we could enter in a test value, and we could pass in 1 and 10. So we want to read an integer between the range 1 and 10. And we could then print out that value. Let's give that a go. That worked. All right, so when I enter my age, I can enter a number, that's fine. All right, so now I'm into enter test value. Remember, this has to be between 1 and 10. So if I do 0, I get an error. Please enter a value between 1 and 10. If I do a number larger than, if I do 11, they're larger than. But the cool thing is, look, if I do Fred, I get please enter a whole number. How's that working? Well, inside of read integer range, or read integer, where we have the range, we call read integer, either first or inside the loop. That comes up here and makes sure that the value we entered is actually a number. So if I enter Fred, that fails and I get that please enter a whole number. It's quite cool if you think about it. Each of these functions is building on top of the previous ones. And it's only when I enter a number within the range that it works. Read string is responsible for printing out the prompt and reading in the line. Read integer makes sure that what we're using or what we're getting is a number. Read integer with the range is then making sure that it's within that range. That's it for me. So what you need to do now is finish extending this for your own program. You need to adjust your read double and use the functions that are specified in the task sheet to help you with that. Remember to include that, or to include the read double range in the header file when you're working with that.